Recently, as some of you will know, Britney Spears had a lot of trouble getting out of a conservatorship by her father, where her finances and really her whole life was being utterly controlled by him. And, you know, it was a very controversial thing, and a lot of people campaigned to get her freed, at least from her father's control. However, she still remains in a conservatorship. And it is interesting to me because I lived to see each phase of Britney Spears' stardom. I was, um, you know, a tween when she first released "Hit Me, Baby, One More Time," and you know, uh, I was growing up as she was going through, her troubles, and you know, it seems to me that in the documentaries made about her situation, there seems to be an amount of inaccuracy and a lot that's left out. For example, for a period of time, she was shown in the news as having been a negligent mother to her children and to not have taken care of them very well, to not have taken good care of her home. The media was very critical of her, and you know, the documentaries do touch on this somewhat, but I feel that some of the context is missing in that a lot of people might not understand how it was that at the time people did not see Britney Spears as a human being. And I think it is a symptom of how different culture was 10 to 15 years ago from how it is today, where when 10 to 15 years ago, people tended to assume that if you were famous, your life was at its zenith and it was as good as it could be, and therefore, no matter how you were treated, you had no right to complain. This is very different from how people think now, where they sort of want to emphasize the idea that money and accomplishments and status is far less important than and meaningful than the basic humanity of a person. And when I think I even recall hearing when Britney Spears was first being brought into this conservatorship with her father, and actually believing at the time that it was a step forward for her, because it, from what the media had to show us, for a long time Britney Spears' life had been completely out of control. The perspective that I and many people held at the time was Justin Timberlake dumped her, then she went crazy as a result. She, decided to shave her head and get herself into a lot of trouble, and to not take to get married to, well, we saw Kevin Federline as being little other than a scuzzball, and so we felt that her having children with him was a bit of a mistake. And, people at the time were less sympathetic towards her precisely because she had enjoyed such popularity for a long time and such fame and such wealth that we, just sort of looked at her as being a tire fire. And, but I think it's not simply that people were less sensitive. That is a factor. But another factor that has to be taken into account is that between when Britney Spears first came to stardom and, when she was at the pinnacle of her fame and success, uh, there was a very, very high degree of social pressure to be like Britney or to be dating a woman like Britney if you were a man. And, if you were a woman or a young girl living at the time, the pressure to look like Britney, dress like Britney, was immense. And you'll notice that a lot of pop stars from that period, particularly female ones, looked a lot like Britney, precisely because at the time to be successful was to be her. And while Britney herself might not have gone around harassing and bullying people, very often popular girl, like just about every high school in the world, I think, had a popular girl who had the money and the looks to dress and look and behave like Britney, and then torture anyone who didn't. And she was usually sort of, venerated by her peers and, looked up to as a kind of goddess, while, other people who weren't like her and who didn't fit in were horribly bullied. And so, by the time, so even if Britney didn't go around torturing people personally, many people were tortured by her specter. Many people were bullied mercilessly and suffered a great deal of psychological distress, not personally thanks to her, but due to her popularity and success and public image. And yeah, so for a long period of time, many people who had been downtrodden as a result of all of this regarded Britney with a very high degree of contempt. At the time, alt groups would pride themselves in being as un-Britney as possible, and you know, yeah, her ubiquity was so much so that you could just say Britney and everyone would understand that you meant Spears, you know? And I'm not saying any of this excuses how she was treated in the media, or how people spoke of her, or, any of the sufferings she later came to know. It's more that at the time, no one understood that her suffering was at least partly because she was not personally, she was being held responsible for all of this psychological difficulty, even though she technically wasn't personally culpable for it. And she was, you know, treated with so much hatred and spoken of with so much contempt as a result of this. And at the time, people didn't understand that her wealth and popularity wouldn't protect her from um, the psychological distress of being hated by millions of people. And, you know, I mean, in retrospect, to me, it's all so obvious. Of course she went crazy. Of course she wasn't able to well parent her children if she was under that degree of psychological distress. But yes, I feel like the importance of acknowledging all of this doesn't go away, because um it's interesting to observe that Brittany has entered into a phase of her life where she is popular for a completely different reason. It's not because she has the boobs and has the body and the clothes and the dance moves and the singing voice and the public image. It's because she has found a way to appeal to a new generation who does not like to see someone being persecuted. And I sort of wonder, I wonder at the idea that people can be so differently treated based solely on cultural context, based solely on how values change over time. I wonder about why it is that we as people decide that it's okay to treat someone poorly purely because of the values we live in, rather than thinking for ourselves and remembering that we wouldn't like to be treated this way. Um, but it's just something that I wanted to lend. People keep framing all of it as being purely a matter of sexism, which to some degree it is. At the time, yes, it is sort of true that there was a bit more pressure, I think, to be sexy and sexually attractive to men in order to be considered a success. There was a lot more pressure to feel that, and therefore there was a lot more pressure to be sexualized as a woman, rather than to simply have your own identity away from that. There was much more pressure to conform to a very feminine appearance through that sexuality, or if you were a man, to be explicitly masculine. There was a lot more pressure, um, and unfairly, at the time, people held Britney responsible for this lack of tolerance in society. It wasn't personally her fault. She was just appealing to demographics of the day and doing, whatever she had to do to be a popular pop star of the time. And yeah, I guess in a sense I am glad though that we as a culture have changed enough that we can realize that it isn't her fault. Not really. That she was simply singing and dancing and doing her performance style, and it's just that society sort of didn't respond well. And yes, I hope that the lesson isn't lost, that you can't assume that someone's life is easy just because they're rich and famous. Or, you can't assume that their life is good just because they're pretty and white. And, I think to that end, one of the big cultural shifts I'm noticing is that back at the time, the perspective was very much, oh, cool people like Britney Spears and Justin Timberlake and all of that only hang around with other cool people. Only cool people in cool clothing with nice bodies get to hang around with cool people who have nice clothing and nice bodies. Whereas in the documentaries that are made about Britney now, you see a lot of, I would say, fairly dowdy and ordinary looking people coming forward to tell stories about their deep friendship with her, which, 2 decades ago would have been considered utterly embarrassing for someone like Britney Spears to have to do. People would have looked at it and thought, why would the pop princess of the universe be hanging around with a bunch of uggos, fat uggos with glasses, why isn't she just hanging out with people like Paris Hilton and like Lilo and, so on and so forth? But again, it is a testament to how our times have changed and perhaps become much more humane. And I am glad to see that much. And, you know, I'm hoping it's a trend that continues. I'm hoping that things don't go back to the way that they were 20 years ago or so. I mean, I consider it highly unlikely given given that people have better come to understand so much about how fame can be so utterly divorced from who a person really is. And I think the fact that we live in a time where what we learn about a celebrity isn't always filtered through the media, but actually they can communicate directly with us as fans. You know, I think that gives celebrities themselves a much greater ability to present us with their basic unfiltered humanity. And I feel that that's a very positive thing. And yeah, again, like people talk about social media being this horrible evil, but really, I think democratizing public information has had this effect, partly of evil, of making it easier to publicize conspiracy theories, yes. But there's this other side to it, where it's also made it a lot easier for people to simply tell their side of a story. And I am grateful for that much.